Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Amita Rari, and coming up in today's newscast, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu departing on a state visit to Berlin amid judicial overhaul protests. Meantime, one of the central figures behind the Abraham Accords having quite the vision for the Middle East. And later, an initiative supported by Jewish National Fund USA is working to preserve Israel's modern history. Protests against the judicial overhaul continue today with disruptions around Ben Gurion Airport ahead of Prime Minister Netanyahu's state visit to Germany. The governor of the Bank of Israel spoke out on the issue on CNN, leveling strong public criticism against overall plans heading through the Knesset. ILTV's Steve Leibovich reports.
Judicial reform protests resumed today. Protesters disrupted traffic around Ben Gurion Airport ahead of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's state visit to the German capital of Berlin. Shortly after midday, thousands of protesters drove slowly on the access roads leading to the airport, as well as inside the airport itself. Veterans of Operation Entebbe, which was led by Yoni Netanyahu, the Prime Minister's brother who fell in action, joined the protest as part of what they called Operation Benjamin. 50 years after the Entebbe hostage rescue, they said their operation is to free a prime minister kidnapped by extremists, and with him, an entire country rushing toward a dangerous coup d'etat. Bank of Israel Governor Amir Yaron today weighed in on the judicial overhaul and did not pull punches with his opposition.
Now the changes in the judicial reform could weaken some of this independence. And moreover, the process itself is a hasty one, and that does not have a wide agreement in the public.
Yaron also told CNN that he was counting on political leaders to make the responsible decisions.
The Rightwing Policy Forum, whose ideas are at the core of the judicial overhaul plan, is now calling for the government to compromise on the far-reaching proposals. More in this report by ILTV's William Sharon.
The Right-Wing Gallant Policy Forum is calling for a compromise on the judicial overhaul, far-reaching policy. Gallant is largely credited with having formulated the ideological foundations of the government proposal. In a statement published on social media channels, Gallant said it continued to believe that deep reform to legal and judicial system was necessary, but that achieving board consensus over the necessary changes was an important component for a long-term constitutional change. The organization even suggested that the extremely controversial High Court override law could be removed entirely from the legislation package. They were less open to serious compromise over the composition of the Judicial Selection Committee. The current bill would give the government complete control over selecting judges. The coalition claims the package will strengthen Israeli democracy by curbing an overly active High Court and better reflect the will of the voters. The opposition and the growing mass protest movement claims the changes would end the separation of powers, rendering basic rights unprotected, and upending Israel's foundational democratic principles of equality and personal freedoms. Most of the key elements of the government plan have now passed first Knesset reading. They require second and third reading before becoming law. Until then, there will likely be changes. But will the compromises satisfy the protesters and the opposition on the one hand, and the coalition and Gallant on the other?
And we want to let you know that ILTV's new app is now available. So if you want to stay connected to the latest news from Israel, the Middle East, and the Jewish world, download our app now on all your devices. It's available in the App Store for both Android and iPhone. Now, an impressive cooperation between Israel and Bahrain, with the first business leaders conference being held in cooperation with the Ministry of Industry and Commerce, the EDB, and the Embassy of the Kingdom of Bahrain in Israel, in Bahrain's capital, with Israeli President Yitzhak Herzog delivering a uniting speech. The first business leaders conference, Connect to Innovate, kicked off this week in Manama, capital of Bahrain. The conference being organized by Startup Nation Central, the nonprofit organization connecting governments, companies, and investors to the Israeli innovation ecosystem. The conference included a recorded speech by Israeli President Yitzhak Herzog, with him welcoming the guests of the first Conference of Business Leaders Connect to Innovate. Herzog referred to his official visit last December and his meeting with King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa and Prince Salman bin Hamad Al Khalifa, Crown Prince and Prime Minister. The president in his speech praised the culture of peaceful coexistence and religious tolerance in Bahrain and praised the initiative to host the first conference that gathers both nations, providing an opportunity for entrepreneurs and companies to communicate and share expertise to build a foundation for prosperous future of cooperation and economic relations between the two countries. Connect to Innovate is the first conference of its kind gathering government officials, large corporations, international organizations, business communities, and technology innovators to focus on challenges in fintech, logistics, supply chain, water, energy, and climate. Keynote speakers at the conference included Abdullah bin Adel Fakro, Minister of Industry and Commerce, EDB CEO Khalid Ibrahim Umaidan, the Ambassador of the State of Israel to the Kingdom of Bahrain, Eitan Naeh, and Startup Nation Central CEO Avi Hasson. And joining us now to discuss the most recent developments relating to the Abraham Accords is Aryeh Lightstone, who served as senior advisor to U.S. Ambassador David Friedman. Aryeh is the author of the book Let My People Know the Incredible Story of the Middle East Peace and What Lies Ahead. Aryeh, good to have you. Now let's start with the announcement of the reestablishment of relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia. You visited Saudi Arabia and have said that its normalization of relations with Israel is within reach. Does this announcement throw a monkey wrench into plan?
I think it certainly changes the calculus of the plan. Saudi, I think, is an incredibly important kingdom for the stability of the Middle East, and I think that stability will be enhanced as they extend relations with Israel and Israel extends relations with Saudi. And certainly the fact that they are talking both robustly with Beijing and Tehran is going to make it more challenging for the U.S., which would be essential to brokering normalization with Saudi and Israel to happen. So it changes the calculus. I don't think it changes the results.
Now, there was a major business conference held in Bahrain with the involvement of a startup nation, with all the news out of Israel regarding our judicial shakeup and the economic fallouts and the tensions ahead of Ramadan. Is this still a good time for business between Israel and Arab nations?
Never been a better time. And the advantage to business is that people sit down across the table from each other, and hopefully not on Zoom, and they get a chance to see how they can go ahead and add value to each other's lives, to each other's businesses, to each other's countries. And the more there's business in between people, not just governments, the more that tension will lower during Ramadan, that opportunities will arise to vacation during Passover. And business, again, has never been a better time. In terms of the judiciary situation here in Israel, I have not seen that slow down business in between the Gulf nations and Israel, and I'm optimistic that it will not.
This is interesting. I mean, we're not hearing these voices enough. What do we know is that Finance Minister Smotrich can't get a meeting in Washington. As a former aide to Ambassador Friedman under the Trump administration, would you have expected a better reception maybe for Smotrich under the circumstances? Also, maybe you'll be able to comment on Ambassador Friedman's recent surprisingly sharp criticism on the judicial overhaul.
Yes, I'm very happy to comment on, I think the U.S.-Israel relationship needs to be strong and needs to be stronger. And when the relationship under the Trump administration, led by Jared Kushner, Mike Pompeo, certainly my boss, David Friedman, when we had disagreements with Israel, my goodness, we kept them quiet. It does not do any good to be able to have those disagreements aired in public. And certainly not meeting with a minister, I'm not positive at all who benefits from that. In fact, I think that you see that, Saudi and Iran coming closer together, brokered by Beijing, that's just, part and parcel of the result of something that happens when this winds up occurring. In terms of what Ambassador Friedman said about judiciary reform, I would encourage you to speak to Ambassador Friedman. I think that he is a brilliant strategist and attorney, and I think it behooves people to listen when he speaks. But he and I have not spoken about judiciary reform, so I'm certainly not going to comment on comments that were made about his comments.
We would be really happy to speak to him too. Now, looking forward, What will it take for there to be a major breakthrough that will ultimately bring normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia?
I'm going to say two of the worst things that I didn't anticipate saying. Number one is, last week, the tensions in Israel are certainly meaningfully high on the ground. And I think that lack of optimism in this country right now is probably the only thing that will hold it back from being the ultimate prize for all of the Abraham Accords to wind up being concluded. If Israel is not promoting Israel, nobody else will promote Israel. So that's sort of point number one. Point number two is that there's a world where Beijing negotiates the rest of the Abraham Accords. And I can't even believe that I'm uttering those words out loud. But when Beijing is the one doing diplomacy in between Russia and Ukraine, I'm not crediting it and I'm not complimenting it, but I'm saying they're there. And when they're now brokering this normalization between Saudi and Iran, and I'm not crediting or complimenting that, but they are there, peace in the Middle East benefits everybody. Led by China, that is not a great net result, certainly because that process I don't think is going to be good for anybody. In order for peace to break out more further than it has already, the U.S. needs to come in and lean strong on the Abraham Accords.
Now, not Israel, but of course related to us, Iran appears to be looking to normalize ties with Bahrain in the wake of the reconciliation with Saudi Arabia in a deal hosted by China, as you mentioned before, which follows a wider attempt by Iran to renew relations and improve ties across the Gulf. What are the inside details here that you have?
Yeah, so look, to the degree that any of this ultimately leads to Iran changing its behavior, that's fantastic. I'm highly skeptical in terms of that actually happening. And this is, when we saw the news, the only thing I tweeted was predictable, sad, but predictable. When the United States of America stands in the region strong, then we're able to divide very clearly who's with us and who's against us. When the United States retreats, other people show up. In this case, other people means China. China and Iran just signed a 25-year strategic agreement. It is in China's interest that Iran gain strength throughout the region, and China is leading as their front person to walk through the door. And when Saudi and Bahrain and UAE look around and they look for the United States of America, where is it? Where are the promises, the commitments, and the efforts that we've made, starting with Afghanistan, going through the missiles that they've received in their own country from Iranian proxies? They look around and the United States is not to be found, so they find China. I don't think that China is their optimal dance partner, but they're there. And therefore, they believe that they can strike a long-term deal with China, and relationships with the United States of America seem to be partisan and causing whiplash.
Aryeh, you left us quite optimistic. Thank you so much for making time for us.
Thank you. We have to be optimistic. It's the Middle East.
Now, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant rejected calls from 50 Knesset members to free Jewish vigilantes held in administrative detention for their role in Huwara riots. 2 Jews are being held on suspicion of taking part in the burning of homes and cars in the Palestinian town following the murder of the Yaniv brothers, and 2 others are held for over a year. ILTV Steve Leibovich reports.
Defense Minister Gallant has called the rampage in Huwara a mark of shame and warned that Israel must not encourage terror by Jews. He refused to be influenced by a letter from over 50 coalition ministers and MKs calling to release the Jewish vigilante suspects immediately. 2 of the detainees are accused of taking part in last month's vigilante rampage through the Palestinian town of Huwara. The other 2 have been held since last year under administrative detention. Administrative detention allows Israel to hold suspects without charging them or allowing them access to counsel or the evidence against them. Defense Minister Gallant insists that the arrest warrants were issued lawfully at the request of the Shin Bet based on significant intelligence material testifying to the detainees being highly dangerous. He said the 29-year-old David Chai Chazdai and an unnamed minor took part in the Huwara rampage and planned additional violent acts that endangered the lives of many residents. The other 2 detainees named in the letter to Gallant were Avram Yair Yared and Elchai Carmeli, both detained last year for alleged attacks on Arabs. Israel currently holds over 900 Palestinians in administrative detention. Meanwhile, Defense Minister Gallant is focused on high-level security talks following the mysterious bomb blast yesterday at the Megiddo Junction in the north. An Israeli Arab was seriously injured in what is being considered a terror-related attack. Details of the case remain sealed. The explosive device was thought to have been planted on the side of the road. The Shin Bet security agency is involved in the investigation, indicating that authorities suspect the explosion is terror-related.
A new report by UN Watch and Impact SC having evidence showing concerning examples of hate and incitement to violence spread by UNRWA teachers and schools. Here's the story. The UN Watch and Impact SE publishing that despite repeated reports warning of the anti-Semitism in United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinians refugee schools, the UN agency is continuing to employ teachers who spread hate and teach hateful and inciting content to children. The 100 pages of the report are showing evidence with examples of how UNRWA teachers and schools are spreading hate and incitement to violence. Thousands of Palestinian children in Judea and Samaria, the Gaza Strip, Jerusalem, Lebanon, Jordan, and Syria are educated by UNRWA. UNRWA is using the textbooks and curricula provided by the host country rather than creating its own educational materials, as UNRWA schools in Jerusalem, the Gaza Strip, and Judea and Samaria are teaching the Palestinian Authority curriculum, found to contain several instances of anti-Semitic and hateful material. While UNRWA insists that it ensures that the way the host country curriculum is taught in its schools in all 5 fields of operation is in line with the humanitarian principles of humanity, neutrality, independence, and impartiality. UN Watch and Impact SE saying that their new report shows this is not the case. UN Watch Executive Director Hillel Neuer commented on the findings, saying, "A mere slap on the wrist to teachers of hate only sends the message that it's business as usual instead. Those who incite racism or murder should be fired under a zero-tolerance policy, just as the UK government banned a teacher from the classroom for life over an anti-Semitic Facebook post." In a severe report by the State Comptroller and Ombudsman of the State of Israel, Netanyahu Engelman, against the backdrop of the earthquakes in Turkey and Syria, he's clearly stating that Israel, with an emphasis on the peripheral cities on the Syrian-African divide, is far from being prepared to deal with a strong earthquake. ILTV's William Sharon has the details.
State Controller and Ombudsman Netanyahu Engelman is publishing a report dealing with the preparedness of the State of Israel for earthquakes, and the picture emerging from it is practically disturbing. It appears from the report there has been a long-standing failure in Israelis' preparation along with all professional bodies for earthquakes, and in particular, the peripheral cities located near and along the Syrian-African fault line, Bet Shean, Tveria, Tzvat, Hatzor HaGlilit, and Kiryat Shmona. The current report being published 5 years after the audit conducted by the previous state controller, Yosef Shafira, which also determined that the state of Israel is not prepared for a strong earthquake and its ability to deal with damages is practically limited. Shafira wrote at that time there is a real fear of the collapse of hundreds of buildings, ranging from apartments and public necessary infrastructures, and England now calling on the government to boost the state's readiness to cope with an earthquake, in particular in communities near the fault line. Since the massive earthquake that struck Turkey and Syria in early February, there has been a significant uptick in seismic activity in Israel and the region at large, with several small tremors registered in the country over the past month. And on Sunday, Israeli emergency authorities kicked off a 4-day exercise simulating the receipt of tons of aid from allied nations amid a devastating earthquake involving 18 countries, along with the European Union and United Nations.
When you think of historical sites in Israel, images of ancient fortresses and archaeological digs usually come to mind. However, an initiative supported by Jewish National Fund USA is working to preserve Israel's modern history. With sites dating back from the first Zionist settlements in the 1800s and others that commemorate the 1948 War of Independence, the Jewish homeland story of rebirth is being woven into the tapestry of its 2,000-year-old story. As Israel approaches its 75th anniversary, an increasing number of tourists are flocking to these heritage sites. And today we have Shachar Hermalin, spokesperson for the Society for Preservation of Historical Sites, joining us in studio. Shachar, can you explain us why your focus is on preserving Israel's modern heritage?
Well, thank you for having me. The story of the State of Israel, of Eretz Israel, is incredible, but it's made of many, many pieces. It's a giant puzzle. And each of the 200 sites that the Society for Preservation of Israel Heritage Sites sees makes one piece of that incredible puzzle. So it's very important that people will know where we came from, because as the old saying of the late Yigal Allon goes, so people who doesn't know its past, its present is dull and its future is questionable. So it's very important that we will have an opportunity to present to everyone in Israel and abroad what we had to go through to be where we are today.
That's definitely true. Now, can you speak more about the importance of preserving these sites and maybe the challenges of doing so? Because I assume, I mean, it's like really old sites. I mean, what are the challenges actually?
Yeah, of course. So other than the 200 visiting sites that the Society oversees, we have an ongoing struggle to preserve important buildings, historic trees, historic sites, because there are pressures all the time, all over the place. Real estate developers want to build new homes. They want to take historic areas and turn them into industrial areas or shopping center. So there is an ongoing struggle to keep these sites for other people to see, and so they will be able to understand what we had to go through. So other than maintaining all these visiting sites, we have people on the ground that watch every day and unfortunately battle every day against all these forces to try and keep these heritage sites intact.
Wow, now as Israel really prepares to mark Independence Day, 75 years, are there any new exhibits or initiatives that you think would be of interest to tourists, maybe to locals? I mean, Israelis love, going on Shabbat and experiencing and new sites?
So first of all, we have an amazing initiative called Israeli Shabbat that started in March of 2021 with the former Minister of Culture and Sports, Chili Trooper. And that allows people to come free of charge on Fridays and Saturdays. We adjusted them to Shomrei Shabbat as well, and visit these sites and understand the stories behind them. Now, with the change of government, we are now working very hard to keep this initiative going. So that's a very, very...
With Miki Zohar.
Yeah. Now the Society answers to the Ministry of Heritage. We moved to the Ministry of Heritage, so we're working very hard to get the budget to continue that. But other than that, every site you come, all over the place, from the northern border to Eilat, we have hundreds of sites that tell amazing stories. Just come and enjoy them. And if I may add, the partnership we have with Jewish National Fund USA helps us improve these sites, improve the experience of visiting these sites, and through other organizations that are supported by Jewish National Fund USA, we are able to do more. For example, we have Lotem, which is an organization that makes nature accessible. We are working with them to make heritage sites accessible to the public. So the partnership with Jewish National Fund USA helps all of us all the time.
That's incredible. We love to explore, that's for sure. Now, looking ahead, Shachar, what are the plans for the future of heritage sites in Israel? I mean, we're 75 now, but, the future is still in front of us. What are the plans? What are the future plans of JNF?
So, first of all, we have many, many plans in the making. Together with Jewish National Fund USA, for example, we have a multi-million plan to Atli detention camp, one of the most important historic sites where people were detained because they were illegal immigrants, according to the British. And together with them, we are improving an amazing place called the Ayalon Institute, which was a secret bullet factory in the pre-state days. We are finishing to build a state-of-the-art new entrance and exit hall together with them. And we are working tirelessly all over the country.
That's incredible. And I assume one of the most beautiful things in Jewish heritage is really never forgetting your history. So Shachar, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Now let's take a look at the weather forecast. Rainy showers are expected around the country tonight with lows of around 9 degrees Celsius or 49 degrees Fahrenheit. Then tomorrow we will see more rainy showers alongside steady top temperatures, seeing highs of about 22 degrees Celsius or 71 degrees Fahrenheit. Now that's all for today's news. For more updates from Israel on all your devices, check out our ILTV channel, subscribe to our ILTV newsletter, and do not forget to check out our new and improved website, ILTV.tv, with all of the latest news from the heart of the State of Israel. I'm Amit Harari. Be well, and thank you so much for watching.